From the 1920s to the 1960s, Americans began to perceive a socialist ideal known as communism as an encroaching threat. Communism scared many Americans who thought that communist policies could infect American government. After World War II, when tensions with the USSR started heating up, Senator Joseph McCarthy used fear-mongering and anti-communist rhetoric to gain power, and used the FBI as his personal vendetta police. Americans were stripped of their civil rights and illegally surveilled and raided by the FBI. After McCarthy's unethical tactics were discovered, the FBI's reputation was tarnished. They needed to reform and reclaim their image as protectors of America instead of prosecutors. This was a frontier in history because the FBI underwent a period of reform to regain the American public's trust and restore safety and security to the country. Senator McCarthy's rise to power in 1950 only increased America's unease and distrust in the FBI. He used hearsay and intimidation to conduct a modern-day witch hunt, accusing anyone who disagreed with his politics of being disloyal to America, and used the FBI to investigate them, costing many people their jobs and reputations. McCarthy's reign of terror continued until his colleagues finally denounced his tactics in 1954, during the Army McCarthy hearings, when Army lawyer Joseph Welch famously asked McCarthy, "Have you no decency?" Other senators and representatives were nervous to confront McCarthy because he had such power that if anyone tried, they would be deemed communist and treasonous. Tensions with the Soviet Union over the race to acquire nuclear weapons didn't help with the paranoia. Public concerns about communism were heightened by international events. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested a nuclear bomb. This was frightening to the United States and our allies. If there would be another war, this would be more devastating than anything the world has ever seen. This connects to the frontier because the FBI was forced to step in, and which naturally caused mistakes and when reformation was necessary. President Truman asked the FBI to discover any Soviet spies hiding in the country. While the FBI did close several spy rings and built some high-profile cases leading to the arrest of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a husband and wife who were convicted of espionage, they also surveilled and intimidated many innocent Americans. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, gave a speech about the rise of communism. That was like fuel on the fire of America's fears. In his speech, he said, "I have always felt that the greatest contribution that this committee could make in the public's disclosure of forces that menace America's communists and fascists. That is why the venom of the American Communist and now defunct German-American Bund has been directed at this committee, as it has also been directed at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What is important is the claims of communists themselves that for every party member, there are 10 others ready, willing, and able to do the party's work." Hoover was behind many of the investigations of average Americans in collusion with Senator McCarthy. He was a staunch anti-communist and compiled extensive files on any group or individual with leaflet leanings, and used wiretaps and surveillance to watch them. Neighbor turned against neighbor, and many people lost their jobs and were alienated from friends and family because of these investigations. In an interview with George Smathers, he said,
Mr. Hoover, some people are saying today that communism is no longer a danger to our country. What is your opinion about that?
Senator, I think that communism is as serious a menace to the United States as it ever was, if not more so. The tendency to judge the strength of the Communist Party by its membership in numbers is fallacious, and I think can lead us into very serious trouble, because today you have in charge of the Communist Party a hardcore, fanatical group of members who are dedicated to the overthrow of our government by force and violence. The Communist Party itself is a part of an international criminal conspiracy for the destruction of the American way of life. It's headed up into Moscow by Nikita Khrushchev, who serves in a dual capacity, first as the secretary of the Russian Communist Party, which is the governing body of communism in the world, and secondly as the head of the Soviet government.
After that, he says, While a small number of the accused may have been aspiring revolutionaries, most others were the victims of false allegations or had done nothing wrong more than exercised their democratic right to join a political party. The full extent of the FBI's abuses of power came to light during the Watergate scandal in 1970. President Nixon used the FBI to illegally wiretap offices of his political opponents and investigate activist groups and political figures who opposed him, and cover up his involvement in breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters. This led to President Nixon's resignation and finally led to the calls of reform in the FBI. Some might argue that the surveillance tactics used by the FBI were justified to protect our nation's security. Top officials in the FBI always acted on the assumption that they could ignore the normal legal rights of political groups because their work was so important to national security, and they didn't have to follow the same rules that other law enforcement agencies had. In fact, some argue that our nation wasn't able to predict the 9/11 terror attacks because of limitations put on the FBI after the Watergate scandal. However, human rights guaranteed by our Constitution are more important. The abuses of power committed by the FBI are evidence of the great risks in giving a government agency unlimited authority to conduct investigations. In reaction to these disclosures, Congress began looking more closely at the FBI. The American Bar Association set up a special committee to study federal law enforcement agencies. The Justice Department established a committee to draw up guidelines for FBI investigations. The FBI could no longer open mail, break into homes or offices without a warrant, or use dangerous or degrading tactics to disrupt lawful political activities of Americans. The Red Scare and Watergate scandal led to the FBI accountability and reform to the betterment of the country. This was huge for the FBI because now people didn't have to fear them, and the many FBI members like Hoover became very famous. After the Red Scare, the FBI transitioned to trying to form a more perfect union rather than trying to catch criminals. This shows how the FBI and Watergate scandals changed the FBI for the better by forcing it to reform. The FBI is a valuable institution for the safety of our nation, and despite the midst of communism and controversy, after reform, they have shown that they can keep Americans safe while maintaining their civil rights.